You're here. This is the way it is. Because they've put your names and your bios and stuff on their video. So if you move, then he becomes Max Blumenthal. Which, you've done nothing wrong.
Oh.
To here?
I need a pen. What's your pen?
What? Yeah, sure. Oh shit, I have to turn this on.
We have a chance to make opening mistakes.
Yeah, so like I'm gonna ask you guys like a question to get us going, and you're all gonna answer it.
Like what?
After that, it'll be questions directed to specific people. Okay? And then for the Q&A, we're gonna take 2 or 3 questions at a time. Nice strict rules.
And there is an introduction, right?
Yes, so I'm gonna introduce the panel.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna give your bios. Wes from Verso is first gonna do like a kind of like a housekeeping introduction.
Yeah.
Then I'll do the introduction on the panel, bios, and we'll go right into it. Okay?
I need to snapshot this.
And keep the intro statements that you make to 2 or 3 minutes. Like I will cut you off.
But in terms of like there will be an intro,
3 minutes.
like introducing.
So the first question that I will ask all of you, and I will ask you, what do you think is the most important thing for people to know about in Syria and the left's responsibility towards it, if any?
Yeah, just like in the topics.
Just like in the topics, yeah. And then after that, there are 3 topics after that, right?
Okay.
So within those, I have specific questions for specific people.
Gotcha.
Okay, so I'll let you know if it's for you.
Okay.
But if you want to answer one of the questions that isn't for you, you can do that. Just like keep it short so we can get through as much stuff as possible.
Oh, lovely, okay.
What?
Many people came.
Oh!
That's
The
it?
owner of the bar next to my Yo, also can show solidarity.
This is Loubna. Mrie. This is my friend Dan.
How are you?
We're working on a documentary on Gaza together.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of your reference. Really.
Appreciate it. Right on, thank you.
Oh, look, there's a sign. We love you. Yo, these are not the rock concert. Yeah, this is what happens when you invite kids.
My co-workers are all sitting on that side over there.
Oh.
The intercept people.
stimulant. That is the opposite.
You want to leave the door open.
Yeah, I think we need like circulation of the air. And also that, yeah, that's also that. I don't know, man. Maybe not enough coffee.
You'll be totally.
You'll be fine. No,
It's
you'll be
good
great.
to find with you.
It's great to talk to you too. You and your furrowed brow.
So I form a brow?
Your furrowed brow.
Oh, I do form a brow.
Yeah, your furrowed brow. Yeah, I want to hear more about life in New York.
Yeah. And you're in New York now?
Yep.
So where do you live?
Washington Square.
Because you're in Hawaii.
You got it. I don't like to like drift too far away from the tribe, so I stay close. Also, why would I? It's so nice. It's very nice. All right. Pretty good. Okay. All right. 10's great.
Hi everyone. Just a few housekeeping rules and we're going to get this event started. There should be extra seats in the back. If everyone wants to kind of present while they can over here, there should be some extra office chairs in the back. Can everyone hear me in the back? Great. So thank you all for coming to this event. It's a very important event, so I'll leave it to our moderators and speakers to take care of everything, but I just wanted some few housekeeping rules. We do have Verso Books and Mukta are both sponsoring this event. We do have Verso Books are all 30% off, and we have beer and wine, as well as some brochures from an organization called Natakalam. So if you'd like to be put on any of our sign-up sheets for future events or our newsletter, we also have a sign-up over there. And yeah, we will have a Q&A. We ask that everyone in the Q&A be very respectful, and we will have a mic that goes around. Be sure to ask questions, not comments. But if you have any questions at the point, we'll be making a staff at which point you'll raise your hand and we'll have people come over for you to ask your questions. But without any further ado, I'll pass it over to Mrie for most
Hello. Thank you for all of you for coming to this. This is an incredible turnout for what I am sure will be a really interesting and important discussion. So my name is Mariam Jamshidi. I am the editor-in-chief and founder of Mufta, a digital magazine that primarily focuses on the Middle East and North Africa. We are first and foremost very thankful to Verso Books for co-hosting this event, and in particular to Mr. Wes House. Shout out to Wes House. The man who truly made this happen on the Verso side. I'm also very thankful to have this incredible lineup of speakers joining us, two of whom came up from DC, and thanks to Alternets, the Gray Zone Project, for making that happen. Also to my staff at Mufta who are here, and they're working this through, and they're working hard to make this possible, especially for those who are not able to be here and who are watching online. A special shout out to Alex Shinnis and Riyad Al-Aryan, who are putting together a special collection around this issue also called Syria and the Left, which we'll publish in a couple of weeks on our site, so check it out. So, I'm going to do a bit more of an introduction for this than I would normally do, given this topic. 5.5 years, 6.6 million people displaced inside Syria, 4.8 million people refugees, nearly 500,000 dead. So those are very staggering numbers. We're here to talk about the developments that have led to those numbers and the U.S. left's attitude toward it. So we know that there are strong feelings on all sides, and there are many sides in this debate. We know families and friendships have been torn apart over the issue of who or what to support in this brutal and seemingly never-ending conflict. But we are not interested here today in replicating hostile, toxic conversations that have become routine on this issue. This conversation is about fleshing out opinions and perspectives, debating and challenging those ideas, and not about attacking anyone individually. Please do not clap or boo during this panel. We will not tolerate foul language, emotional outbursts, personal insults, or ad hominem attacks against anyone on this panel or in the audience. These are the basic requirements of meaningful and civilized debate, and they will be respected here. My role is to facilitate a constructive conversation. I will be asking some basic questions about the conflict, background, before getting into some more specific issues. You'll have plenty of time to ask the panelists your questions during the Q&A, which will be fairly substantial at the end of our panel discussion. So most of you don't know me, but I have been dedicated to the region for the vast majority of my adult life. Open dialogue and free exchange are incredibly important principles to me personally, and I very much believe that this is the kind of debate that we will have tonight. So I ask you to really listen to one another without prejudgment. Question your own assumptions, challenge your prejudices, and perhaps you might find common ground with those you never expected to. Maybe in the end we can even find a way through to that field beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing that Rumi was so fond of. So, bios on our speakers. So to my right we have Zein El-Amine. Zein was born and raised in Lebanon and lived in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain before coming to the United States to work. He currently teaches at the University of Maryland on courses such as Arabic language, English literature, global literature and social change, and the Arab world today. He is a published poet and writer and one of the founders of Left Turn magazine, a magazine by and for activists. He is also the creator and host of a weekly radio show about Middle East politics and culture called Shai wa Nana, Mint and Tea, which airs weekly on Pacifica Radio in DC. To my left, we have Loubna Mrie, a Syrian activist who participated in the initial stages of the revolution. She later became a photojournalist with Reuters based in Aleppo, where she covered the ongoing conflict in Idlib, Aleppo, Latakia, and Hama governorates. Originally from the Syrian coastal city of Jable, she is currently based in New York, where she is a researcher and commentator on Syrian and Middle Eastern affairs. Her work has been published in the Washington Post, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, The New Republic, among other publications. And then we have Max Blumenthal, a senior editor at Alternet's Grey Zone Project and the author of 3 books, including most recently The 51-Day War, Ruin and Resistance in Gaza. Last but not least, Murtaza Hussain, a national security and foreign policy journalist at The Intercept. So we're going to begin with a question for all of our panelists. So what, in your view, is the most important thing for people to understand about the Syrian conflict, as well as the left's responsibility toward that conflict, if anything? Zein, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, the reason why we're here and the reason why there's such a huge crowd here is because this is a very contentious issue, as Miriam laid out. And we have a situation where there's the binary the binary formulation is being put out, where anybody that is criticizing any kind of intervention is being framed as an Assadist. Anybody that is supporting any aspect of what might be called the revolution, or what remains of the revolution, is called an Al-Qaeda supporter or a jihadist, and so on and so forth. It's become, the discussion has reached the point where a lot of my friends are fighting among each other, and in the worst way possible, without any articulation of what's happening. And the discussion has reached a level that where there's no, it's ahistorical. It's become detached from any analysis of what happened with the Arab Spring. It's become detached from what happened in Iraq, in the war in Iraq, what led to the war in Iraq, and what were the results of the war in Iraq. So I feel that the most important thing that we need to get here is to reframe this discussion so that we can talk about de-escalation, the de-escalation of this. What is it going to take for the American left to work on de-escalation and working towards peace for Syrians? That's the sum of it for me.
Thank you. Loubna?
Thank you so much. I think what you just said is and I agree with you on some points. I think like the most of, sorry, I'm kind of nervous, it's back here. I think the problem with the arguments that some voices and the left we are seeing today, the main problem with them that they often deny the Syrian voices and they deny the agency of the Syrian people. You spoke about the regime change. The regime, I don't know why we think the regime change in Syria is a bad idea if it came from its own people. Here, the regime change in Syria, when it first started, it was not imposed by the Western powers, and this is what I'm saying. This is what I mean by, I feel that the Syrian voices here are eliminated, and we are just kind of portrayed in the left argument as just we are puppets by the imperialist interventions and powers. And if we are here speaking also about the interventions, I don't know why we're just wasting time and energy speaking about hypothetical interventions instead of talking about the intervention that is already going on in the country, which is by the Russian regime, by the Syrian government and its Russian allies. Another thing is, and my main problem with some voices in the left here that they often, when they want to deal with the Syrian conflict, they focus on the last fragment on the conflict without really understanding the timeline. And can you hear me? Okay. What we want from those voices at the left that some I disagree with, that just at least start with showing solidarity with the Syrian people by insisting on the accountability for all war crimes committed by all sides, and by starting by admitting that the most killing is the most killing is by the part that is doing the most killing is the Syrian government by the airstrikes. I don't know. Yeah, that's it for now.
Max?
Thanks. Someone told me on the way in, I'm appalled by what you write, but I'm glad you're here. So I hope that attitude prevails. Somehow I don't know. I got love bombed when I resigned from Al-Akhbar in 2012, which is a bastion of leftist thought in the Arab world in Beirut. And it's still a valuable newspaper, its Arabic edition. I resigned because there were people who were saying, that to be a leftist, you must support Bashar al-Assad. There's no other way. And, I found that appalling. I wanted to, take a stand with people like Loubna. I saw a civil uprising taking place. I knew that pressure from the bottom is the only way to make change in authoritarian governments. Change can't come from the outside. Now I find myself in a situation where I'm being told that to be on the left is to support Assad, but from an escalationist perspective, from the other side. And I also reject that. Escalation leads to escalation in Syria and elsewhere. And we can't have this debate without acknowledging that Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United States have pumped hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars of weapons and arms and helped fuel a human catastrophe, which of course Russia and the Syrian government are heavily involved and implicated in. There's no denying that here. My point, and what I'm going to argue tonight, is just pretty simple, that the war is the root of all evil, that this war has to end today, and anyone who says that it should continue, that it should be escalated for an idea that they don't have to bear the consequences of, deserves to be challenged. Now there's a push for escalation. We hear it in the form of a no-fly zone, which is actually an all-out U.S. military assault across Syria. We hear about safe zones. We've heard everything short of love bombing. Calls for cruise missiles, more heavy weapons for rebels. And if you challenge the narrative, and especially if you're on the left, you get pathologized. you get caricatured as a conspiracist. You get mocked. You get doxxed. You get accused of secret loyalty to Russia, which is consistent with the McCarthyite environment we're in. You get threatened, you get blacklisted, you get mocked, and of course, you get called an Assadist. That might be why it was difficult to find people to join this panel from this perspective. Why are these tactics being used? Well, for one, we know that eastern Aleppo has been turned into a kill box by the Syrian government and by Russia. But it's also being used to protect a narrative that erases West Aleppo, that erases the Syrians who are living in government areas. And West Aleppo right now is under a rebel assault, which has been described by UN envoy Staffan de Mistura as war crimes, indiscriminate rocketing of civilians, which have killed many, many civilians. That's happening today. And this narrative is being advanced in the name of Syrian agency. It's being advanced in the name of Syrian voices, as if all Syrians speak with one voice, as if the majority of Syrians, according to the most recent polling, don't disagree with the escalationist narrative that's being pumped out of Saudi-funded think tanks inside the Beltway. I disagree with the idea that all Syrians have the same opinion, just as I disagree with the idea that as an American who's part of a country that's being asked to send more weapons in, that I can't have an opinion. I don't think that Ahmed Chalabi speaks for all Iraqis, and I damn sure don't think that Benjamin Netanyahu speaks for all Jews. And I'm here just to speak for myself. So I'm here to just make a simple point to those of you on the left, to all decent people. The war has to end now. This is a choice between more war and less war. It's not a choice between Assad and the opposition. More war or less war. Get out in the streets and advance your anti-war principles and use the leverage where you have it to call on this government and its allies to stop fueling this catastrophic conflict and end it today.
Okay, Murtaza.
Well, I just came back from a trip to the Turkish-Syrian border. I just came back a week or so ago. And I think if I would say one thing, which I want people in this room to know, is that what's happening is the eradication of people, the eradication of the poor classes of Syria, who are huddled in camps and tents, converted storage boxes, and on the poor streets of Turkish suburbs trying to survive. There are an estimated 2.7 million Syrians who are now living in Turkey and 5 million who displaced around the globe. And I think that being against intervention is a perfectly defensible position. And I think that, as Max alluded to, there's a very real mutual escalation dynamic that happens when Russia, Iran, outside parties are involved, where if the U.S. were to step in more forcefully, it would not end the killing, it would probably displace the killing. That's a very reasonable argument. The problem is, when you're advancing an argument in good faith, an anti-war argument, it's very important not to employ the arguments of a certain party. So if you're saying that I'm against the war because of an escalationist dynamic, that's fine. The problem is when you start saying that everyone who's fighting against Assad today is a terrorist, or even the non-violent people who are engaged in certain forms of activism are, as what he says, Al-Qaeda paid proxies of certain groups, that becomes very troubling. You start adopting Islamophobia or war on terror rhetoric, which we all oppose in other contexts, in the context of Israel-Palestine, for instance. So I say that if you're going to take a position on this, saying that I'm against intervention is a fine position, but it's insufficient in and of itself. Because those 5 million refugees are refugees for a reason. They don't want to go back to this government, which, as most of us, or all of us here on this panel, tacitly agree that they're the ones who are the instigators or one of the prime causes of this violence. A UN Human Rights Council report issued today found that over 90% of the deaths in the conflict are from the Syrian government. So if the position is the war has to end, I completely agree. And I'm not in favor of more US involvement or escalation, which will inevitably result in more deaths. But what's the context of the war ending? Is the war ending and the Syrian government takes control over the entire country? Refugees don't go home? After committing terrible, horrific acts in full view of the world for 5 years, they will continue to rule the country indefinitely as they did before? The country will be given to the son of Bashar al-Assad in 15, 20 years? That's an affront to humanity. It's disgusting. There's absolutely no way that we can countenance that. And if we're going to be against intervention, which I think is a reasonable position, as I said, you have to proffer another solution where there's a sense of justice in Syria, there's a sense of political transformation, and those who committed crimes on both sides of the conflict should be held to account. I would analogize it to if a priest raped a child in the Catholic Church. Do you tell the child to suck it up and go back to how things were for the good of the church? No, you do not. You have a sense of justice because it's moral, but more so because you're creating a problem which will manifest down the line anyways. So if you tell Syrians, well, the regime did horrible things to you, would use chemical weapons, employed rape, barrel bombings, and so forth, but for the good of stability or the good of a certain ideological dynamic, you'll have to suck it up and go back. Things just got out of hand. I guarantee if that happens, you will create a problem which will necessitate the US government invading in 15 years. And it won't be a debate. You'll be forced to go back there. So the important thing is to end the war, as all of us said here, but end it on just terms that ensure stability and put an end to this horrific human condition we're witnessing today.
Okay, so a couple of questions to sort of talk a little bit about how this conflict developed over the last 5.5 years. So 2 videos recently surfaced that capture the devastation on both sides. One was of a mother who found out her child was killed by rebel shelling in the western part of Aleppo. The other is a video from the UK Channel 4 of the aftermath of a Syrian or Russian airstrike on a school in Idlib. So on these questions of equivalence, are both sides equally to blame for the devastation in Syria? Who or what is the biggest threat to the Syrian people right now? And this question is for Murtaza and Max. Max, why don't you go first?
Can you repeat the last part of the question? Who or what is the biggest threat?
To the Syrian people right now.
Well, different Syrian people are threatened by different factors, but as I said in the beginning, the war is the root of all evil, and more escalation. If we surrender to these escalationist narratives, Syrian people will be killed. And there's no reason for the killing to continue. I agree, with Murtaza. He talked about a mutual escalation. And mutual escalation means that if we send in more heavy weapons to the rebels, Russia will escalate more. And it means that if shoulder-mounted anti-aircraft weapons are sent in, Russia will escalate more. And I know that you said, Murtaza, in 2012 that it was a problem that shoulder-mounted anti-aircraft missiles weren't sent to the FSA. That actually, I think, is very. First of all, they were sent through Qatar through the program that the U.S. had authorized, Timber Sycamore, through Prince Bandar, who also helped fund the Contras in Nicaragua. But this helped lead to the weaponization of a legitimate revolution, and it's taken us to where we are. So I think it's a very dangerous proposition to talk about sending more weapons in, and we have to use the leverage where we have it. This government has sent over $1 billion to train and equip Syrian rebels, and we've seen multiple. It's supposed to go to the quote-unquote moderate rebels. Who are they? That we're told they're the FSA. The FSA has, in multiple instances, has worked directly with, has fought alongside, for example, at Meneg Air Base, fought alongside Omar Shishani of ISIS, the commander, Okaiba, of the FSA battalion at Meneg Air Base, did a press conference praising Shishani, Chechen foreign fighter, called him a hero. Then a year later, he disbanded his brigade and condemned all the FSA commanders as warlords. Today, Ibrahim Homaidi, who is a reporter for Al Hayat, which is a Saudi paper, it's basically the mouthpiece for the prince. He's pro-rebel. He was interviewed by Bassam Haddad from Jadaliyah, who's one of the most respected analysts, and he said the moderates are now representing 10 or 15%, and the rest are generally either Islamists or close to Al-Qaeda. That doesn't mean that these people can't be negotiated with, that there can't be a de-escalation, but we have a responsibility here as Americans, as internationalists, to exercise leverage where we have it and stop the flow of weapons, stop the funding of violent extremism, and stop this mutual escalationist dynamic, which you talked about, which also encourages massive crimes that we all know are committed by Russia and the Syrian government.
So just to clarify, when it comes to the question of who is the biggest threat to the Syrian people right now, which actor or actors, your answer is?
Well, I mean, most of the majority of deaths have been caused by Russia and Syria, but I would reject For example, the comments by Yassin Hajj-al-Saleh that ISIS is the lesser evil. ISIS executed 264 people today in Mosul. So this idea of greater evils and lesser evils, it's all being wielded to protect an escalationist narrative instead of talking about how we can move towards de-escalation, how we can move towards actual conferences that do something more than Geneva. And if you want to talk about death counts, read Colum Lynch in Foreign Policy, January 2016. There's an analysis of all the death counts, and there's no reason to nickel and dime death. Syrians are dying by the thousands. But, he found that, Rami Abdul Rahman, who's typically relied upon from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, who's basically one dude in a house in England, who's relied upon by all of the much of the international media, who says that his accounts are estimates, has said the following, that his figure of 260,000 killed in 5 years of crisis includes a large number of government troops, 53,718, as well as pro-government militias and popular defense forces, 36,760, I think. So a substantial number of this pro-opposition Syrian Observatory for Human Rights death count includes people who've basically been conscripted, people who are fighting on the side of the government. And my point is, everybody's dying. We have to listen to all of them and find a way of de-escalating. It's a question of more war or less war, and one more TOW missile, and one more shoulder-mounted missile, and one more rifle that the U.S. supplies through the Turkish border, which, by the way, is kind of closing off now, will not help anything and will lead to more death.
Murtaza? Loubna?
Can I just, you mentioned a couple of things about, a couple of facts about the Free Syrian Army, and this is and it's very important to understand how the armed opposition started in the country. For the first 6 months, we didn't have armed opposition in the country. Then after the government started to target the peaceful demonstrations, people started to defect from the government and the police forces, and they went to protect those demonstrations. You mentioned Omar Shishani, who was with ISIS. The first battle against ISIS started in December 2013, and it was led by the Free Syrian Army. And back then we saw the liberation of areas from ISIS that the Free Syrian Army liberated Idlib, Aleppo, and we lost lots of Free Syrian Army commanders. So most of the leaders from the Free Syrian Army commanders were killed by Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They were not killed by the government. Also, you mentioned something about the money of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. I'm not stupid. I know that the foreign money has an agenda in the country, but let's ask ourselves what pushes those people to accept such money and such agenda in the country.
Well, Haytham Al-Mana introduced the 3 no's in 2012. I think it was in 2011. This is a Syrian dissident. Has been writing for 30 years about Syria, been heavily involved in Syrian politics. No sectarianism, no militarization, no foreign intervention. And I think that was a successful formula for continuing the revolution and not playing into the government's hands and not playing into the government's war on terror narrative, which you pointed out, Murtaza. And what it's done, weaponizing a civil uprising and handing it over to a militarized strategy has reinforced and legitimized everything Bashar al-Assad wants to happen with his war on terror narrative. And it's what the Algerian government did in the 1990s. It's been very dangerous, it's been very destructive, and it's brought us to where we are, where you have war crimes being committed across Aleppo. Let's not erase West Aleppo, just as we focus on the 100 to 275,000 people in East Aleppo's kill box. Let's talk about what's happening in West Aleppo, where the dissident Edward Dark has said that prior to today, 5,000 people have been killed by rebel shelling. And, Loubna, you brought up regime change in the beginning and said that would be a good thing. Do you have any idea what would happen the day after the government falls? Because if we look at Libya right now, I'd just like to hear your vision.
Okay,
if we look at Libya right now, it's not a pretty picture.
Okay, first of all, you just mentioned that we don't really bring up the civilians of the government side. I started by speaking and saying that we want accountability for all the war crimes that are committed by all sides.
Okay,
And just
let her finish.
okay.
Sorry.
If you're really concerned about the democracy in the country, the first step for achieving the democracy in the country is by stopping the violence. And we saw what happened when the ceasefire took place. We saw lots of demonstrations actually against the government and against Al-Qaeda and against ISIS at the first place. So if you're trying to tell me that if the government stepped down, what are our next situation? I think let's first start with ending this violence, and then we can think about the next step. Because I would. I lost my thought. Okay, another thing that also we have to understand that Al-Qaeda today, for example, is gaining support because they are doing military operations. Like you can't really argue with those people who are under siege today that they should stand against Al-Qaeda if they broke the siege on their city.
So let's let Murtaza weigh in, since this question was also for him.
What was the original question again?
I don't know. So who or what is the biggest threat to the Syrian people right now, in your view?
Well, as I alluded to in my opening remarks, there was a UN Human Rights Council report which came out today and did not rely on Rami Abdulrahman's reporting, which is from the UK and is less rigorous than certain on-the-ground sources. This is a 5-year periodic human rights review of Syria. This review found that over the past 5 years, over 400,000 deaths, over 90% were attributed to government sources. So I was the one who did the interview with Zein, which was referenced by Max earlier. When he meant the lesser evil, not that necessarily they're less horrible or less egregious ISIS than the Assad government, but the fact is they've killed magnitudes less people. They're very good at capturing our imagination as these Islamic extremists, but these secular governments historically the biggest killers in the Middle East. And if Assad were gone one day, if he left of his own volition, ISIS is a lot easier to defeat than Assad. These militant groups which have not sat sediment on society for decades and decades can be dealt with in a certain way which Assad can't.
What does it mean for Assad to leave?
Let me finish. I'll get to that. And also this thing that the FSA has undoubtedly committed crimes in the past. So groups in the opposition have undoubtedly committed crimes. And most Syrian activists, the vast majority of them will concede that. It's the government, the biggest criminal, which does not concede that has committed any crime. In an interview today, Bashar al-Assad said that none of the atrocities were for me. And he will rule, as according to him, until at least 2021. After all these horrific crimes, he plans to stay in power without any accountability at all. What happens in a situation where there's horrific human rights abuses, no one is fighting back or helping the people, and as we recognize with great nuance and compassion in the Palestinian case, is that there's a sense of radicalization, and people turn to religious extremism or they turn to conservatism as a way to assuage that. And in Syria, the brutality is something that has not been seen in the Middle East in modern times. It's beyond anything we've seen. Chemical weapons, the disappearance of tens of thousands of people in the prisons, barrel bombings, horrific torture, again, disproportionately from one side. Of course, there'll be a dynamic of radicalization.
Okay. Go ahead. So,
I don't think that it's helpful to reduce it to a binary where one side is lesser evil and the other side is then good, or the other side, is, one side should not rule. Either side who's committed great crimes has to have a justice and accountability. The Assad government has committed incredible crimes. They should not be deposed by force because, as we've seen, the country would devolve into God knows what. What should happen is there should be a dynamic whereby they agree to leave power, and those individuals who've committed crimes at the top of the government should not be endowed with the power to continue ruling as though nothing had happened, as they're planning to do today, since they're seeing victory within their sights.
Okay. Before anyone answers, let's go on to our next question. So, Murtaza, you recently came back from a trip to Gaziantep, where you wrote about the peaceful Syrian civil society actors and the work they continue to do outside the country for their country. So, of course, it's important to remember the civil society actors who have and continue to fight peacefully for their country. But at the same time, the conflict's brutality and violence obviously cannot and should not be ignored. So, other than its historical importance, what is the ongoing significance of the conflict's peaceful roots? And this question is for you and for Zein.
Sorry, what was the question?
Sorry, the question is, what is the significance of the conflict's peaceful roots other than as a sort of a historical, a note in history?
If these people, if Syria will ever have a future which is in any way desirable again, these are the people who will return to Syria to make that happen. These people still exist in huge numbers. They're scattered all around the world. There's 5 million people who are part of the massive diaspora which has been created. If there's going to be any hope for the country, these people have to go back. They cannot go back if they're living under ISIS, obviously, and they cannot go back if they're living under the Assad government. They will put them in jail the next day to disappear them, never be seen again. So it's been depicted as a historical thing. These people are very much there. They're there advocating and having hopes for the country as they were always. So if we are to create a dynamic where the war ends, which we're all very much in agreement with, it has to be a just ending that allows such people to come back and to build their society again, which is the only thing they want. They don't want to come back to vengeance necessarily. They want to come back to justice and a sense of possibility in their country, which will not exist in a totalitarian dictatorship.
Zein, do you have a view?
Well, I want to go back to the question, what's the biggest threat? Because I'm confused here. Okay, first of all, are we going to get into another debate about numbers, or are we going to talk about what are you proposing? I mean, I mean, are you proposing a U.S. intervention to bring? What?
Please stop.
Are you proposing a U.S. intervention? That's what in order to carry on this dialogue, I want to understand what are you proposing.
In other words, maybe what mechanisms could be employed to promote the ouster of Bashar al-Assad, which you seem to want, and also what can people in this room do to help make that happen?
No one's asking people in this room to join the Air Force and start bombing Bashar al-Assad or to join militant factions to depose him. We advocate for the Palestinians all the time without the expectation that we'll enact state-level change. This is about Syria and the left. People on the left, we have rhetorical devices. We have moral support to offer. You don't have to offer support to the U.S. government. You can support people on the ground who have a similar vision of Syria that you want to have. And you don't have to take a side with the state.
Hold on for a second. So, if you don't mind me moderating a little bit. So, I would like, the question of what happens next is obviously a very big one and will come up over and over again. But I think it's important that we talk about some of the more discrete issues that lay the groundwork for this. I'd like to know what you think about the peaceful activists inside and outside the country. Are they still relevant? Are they just a note in history, or do they still have a significance? Because they're there, right? And many people point to the peaceful roots of the revolution to argue for things like intervention, right? So I think it's important to hear your views on those peaceful roots and their continuing relevance.
I mean, is there a question to the composition of the opposition at this point? I mean, the whole spectrum from left to right agrees. I mean, I've seen Pentagon folks wriggling in front of Congress, trying to count on their fingers who they can actually vet within the country. I'm sorry it got to this point, but we're dealing with this material reality right now, where the vast majority of what's called the opposition is a reactionary one, is an extremist one, is one that is tied with Al-Qaeda, is one that keeps changing its name, trying to distance itself from its identity with failure. That's what's happening in terms of the opposition. There are, of course, peaceful. Let's in order to talk about the peaceful protest, let's remember that we all of us here on the table, and probably most of the people in the crowd here, was cheering the Syrian revolution because we got caught up with the Arab Spring, and something caught us in mid-cheer. Something caught us in mid-cheer in Libya. Something caught us in mid-cheer in Syria too, when we saw the elements that came in. And we're not arguing here whether Assad clamped down violently. We're talking about that these elements that came in, and the fact that Saudi Arabia was really upset about what happened in Egypt and was really wanted to preempt what they thought is a revolution that's going to come to their doorsteps, and intervened in all of these things, in Libya, and in Syria, And in Bahrain, and this is forgotten, there's a blind spot for people that are calling for intervention to Bahrain and to Yemen. In Yemen, there's 80% of the population is under threat of famine. It amazes me that people who are so set on intervention in Syria don't mention Yemen whatsoever. And when the Bahraini revolution happened, nobody mentioned it. Nobody talked about it. It's as if the Syrian revolution is happening in a vacuum. So there was, let's not forget that we were cheering for it, that we were caught up with that. Sincerely, we wanted that thing to succeed, but it didn't succeed. And there's a material reality we are dealing with right now, and that's what I want to deal with right now.
Yeah, and I think the Palestinian parallel is not apt. The United States is not funding Palestinian resistance. That's why BDS exists. The U.S. is funding Israeli apartheid. So we're talking about removing complicity. That's the leverage we have. Now, many of the people that you met in Turkey are people who are genuine revolutionaries who should have, and I agree with you, Murtaza, on all that. There's no dispute about that, but there are also people in Idlib and East Aleppo who are revolutionaries, who are trying to run radio stations like Radio Fresh in Idlib, who are lawyers, who are involved in civil activism, who have been crushed not only by the Syrian government, but by Al-Qaeda, by Nuruddin al-Zinki, which is a U.S.-funded, a group that the United States through the CIA funded until 2015, which this year beheaded on camera an adolescent Palestinian boy. So you have to turn to Amnesty International's July 2016 report, and I pulled it up on my phone just to quote Philip Luther. In Aleppo, and he's referring to eastern Aleppo, in Idlib today, armed groups have free rein to commit war crimes and other violations of international humanitarian law with impunity. They profiled 24 Syrians, many of whom are activists who are part of the original revolution, living in these areas, who have been tortured in methods mimicking the methods that the Syrian government used, like the tire, for example. It quotes Basel, a lawyer who was kidnapped and tortured, and he says in this report that things were bad under the Syrian government and I opposed it. They're worse now. So you have to remove our complicity and stop funding these groups. The Century Foundation, a think tank in Washington, has called for funding Nuruddin al-Zinki again because the U.S. needs to get its hands dirty. No. And we have to get, that will help give these people a chance as well. That's where our leverage is, and that's the way that these people can return to the forefront, these legitimate activists.
So I want to turn to another issue very quickly. This will come up again. This will come up again, I promise you can respond. This question is for you. This question is for you. So the left has been criticized, as you mentioned in your opening statement, for ignoring or erasing Syrians. This is something that people have noted or argued about the left in terms of its perspective on Syria. So has the issue of Syria and the left become too much about the left, about its opposition to U.S. interventionism and imperialism, no matter the cost to human lives, and not enough about the people inside Syria? I would like the two of you to answer that, starting with Loubna.
First of all, our main problem today with the left that they're so selective in their solidarity. For example, Max was talking over and over about how the armed opposition is targeting the government areas in Aleppo, which I don't agree with. But when the picture of Umran came out, he was questioning who took the picture of the kid instead of questioning who did the bombing of his
That's
house.
false. That's false. I think that's false.
You didn't question who took the photo of Umran?
I did not question. I reported on who took the photo, but I didn't question the bombing. I didn't obscure the fact that it was Syrian or Russian bombing. And so let's just be factual here.
Okay.
I mean, you can critique my work all you want, but just please be factual.
I will critique that how the left are being selective in their solidarity, and I think here we both agree that Al-Qaeda, for example, don't have a future in the country because the Syrian activists who are currently are in the country, they don't agree with their ideology. So this is also an argument that we always see by the left, that there is no future of democracy in the country if the government step down.
So
Yeah, go.
Sorry, Zein, do you have a view on whether or not the left has been excluding Syrian voices and perspectives?
I'm not sure what the left is that you're talking about, but
Thanks for coming to this panel anyway.
No, seriously. There's a left that I live in, okay, and that left that I live in. First of all, the problems has been the fetishization of the Syrian refugee problem at the cost of other issues. The left, I think, is the left that I'm dealing with right now is divided, okay, and they're not selectively. If any selective solidarity is happening, it's laying aside of the struggles in Yemen. It's laying aside the struggles in Bahrain. It's not really assessing. Let's talk about the Libyan revolution. When the Libyan revolution happened, there was a weird thing happening where, again, we were caught in mid-cheer and we saw all these unsavory elements, and NATO intervened and the US intervened, and the left is still cheering and calling this a revolution, way beyond the time that it was a revolution. And now we see the results, and we see the kind of motley crew that's running amok in Libya right now, and we see the GDP of the Libyan people dropping by 2/3. I think, if anything, the left needs to to step back, to take a wider vision of what's happening around in the region, and to set the Syrian struggle within that setting.
Just one last question. Who are you criticizing by not showing solidarity with Yemen? The American government or the Syrians? Because
No, I'm not criticizing the Syrians.
Because
the Syrians
White
have their own.
tweeted a solidarity with.
What's that?
Because the White Helmets, they tweeted in solidarity with what's going on in Yemen.
I'm not talking about the White Helmets.
Please don't be
No, because
talking
you are
about
just criticizing that we are selective in our solidarity. Can we just for a second look at the Syrian situation without looking at it through the American lens? I don't care if the Americans not showing us solidarity with Yemen, because we do. We show solidarity with Yemen.
Murtaza has been waiting very
I
patiently.
just wanted to say unequivocally that the struggles of people in Yemen and Bahrain are no less just or worthy of support. Anyone who has selective sympathy based on sectarian grounds or ideological grounds is doing themselves a huge disservice, and they're not serving the cause of justice more broadly. And I think that's a very valid point to raise. But I don't think that the left necessarily does not show some solidarity in Yemen and Bahrain. I think the problem is that we've decided that if airstrikes are leveling a huge part of a city to fight terrorism, that's actually okay as long as they're Russian planes, or we won't get exercise.
Who's decided that?
Well, if no one, if
Name someone who's decided
those
that.
who do not speak, we get names of every single person.
Well, it's a straw man if you can't say who's decided that.
Have you condemned Russian airstrikes in Aleppo? Have you?
Of course, I condemned it right now. But the question, you're talking about virtue signaling and moral posturing. We're not talking
Let
me
anything
take it down.
concrete.
Let's take it down a little bit.
Let me respond. Virtue signaling is the idea that the only reason you express sympathy for someone abroad is because how it makes you look here. We should care about those people regardless of what the situation is. We want them to thrive and not be killed, whether it's by Russia or whether it's by the United States.
Are you accusing me of
imperial
caring less?
or sub-imperial
Are you accusing me
powers.
of caring less because my
Well,
government
my
government is sanctioning Russia. It's given up all the leverage it has as far as the stick goes. This government is sanctioning Syria. So what leverage do I have?
We never discussed you as a state actor in the United States.
What you're doing is exactly what Boris Johnson did in his attempt to gaslight the Labour Party. He told them go protest outside the Russian embassy so he can protect the escalationist agenda of the UK, which is helping to flood Syria with weapons. And my point is, yes, Russia has done is criminal. Yes, what Syria has done is criminal. I agree with Stefan de Mistura that Russia and Syria should stop bombing East Aleppo and Al-Qaeda should leave. And I'm sure you agree too. But what the whole point of this discussion is what we can do and where we have leverage is to remove our complicity and to get out in the streets and be anti-war and stop letting people mock you for being anti-war. Stop letting people mock you and gaslight you and dox you and insult you for advancing the same principles that you advanced in the run-up to the Iraq War.
Right.
And we heard the same attacks during the run-up to the
Okay,
Iraq
Well,
War.
hold on. Before we continue, the purpose of this panel is to have a civilized discussion. And so I would appreciate if the panelists didn't raise their voice. I think that's an important thing for us to just set a baseline for. Before you respond, I want to ask another question. It kind of gets to some of the debates we're having right now. So two sort of very foundational leftist principles, anti-imperialism and solidarity. Are they compatible when it comes to Syria? Are they, in fact, at the root of the left's rupture over Syria?
Can we for a second stop wasting our time and energy talking about the hypothetical imperialist intervention that, in my opinion, the no-fly zone is not going to happen, because there is no way the American government, the American government will go into a direct war with the Russian government. Second of all, let's talk about the existing imperialist intervention. If we're very worried about the intervention here, let's first talk about the Iranian militias and the Russians.
Yes, let's talk about that. Let's talk about why that happened. Now, let's talk about it.
Okay. Why?
Do you think that you can be anti-imperialist on Syria and
sure.
still stand in solidarity with who? With the Syrian people, correct?
Yeah, but don't be selective in your solidarity. You cannot criticize the people who are rescuing people from underneath the rubble without really mentioning why they're doing that. You are basically criticizing the one who is buying the hammers instead of just criticizing the people who are throwing the bombs.
What subject are we going to talk about? Are we going to talk about why Russia is there? Because it goes back to what we said at the beginning about mutual escalation.
From the white helmets and the Syria campaign.
Hold on, so no one's answering my question. Murtaza, would you like to answer my question?
What's the question again?
The question is, are solidarity and anti-imperialism, are they incompatible when it comes to Syria, or are they compatible?
No one is forced into a binary where you say that if I condemn the regime and I condemn counter-revolutionary armed groups, that means I'm in favor of bombing the country, or in the most egregious way, supporting of terrorist groups. That's absolutely not the case. You can support the aspirations of democratic activists or people who want a political transition in Syria and explicitly say, but I do not support bombing the country or flooding the country with more arms in a way which is completely uncontrolled and, at this point, impossible to predict the results of. So I think that forcing this binary is completely unnecessary. I don't know why people in this ideological straitjacket in this case. I'm sure all of us, I assume, believe that the Assad government, after committing horrendous crimes, which we've all said are disproportionately on their side, should have a managed transition out of power to a democratic Syria, and those on both sides who committed crimes should face accountability. This is an eminently reasonable position which is not incompatible with saying that I don't want a war between Russia and the United States. And we can criticize the interventions which are happening now and saying, I want the bombing to stop because I have solidarity with those people who, believe me, they care about what people in the West think. They care that people at least care what the situation is and have moral support for them beyond asking for them to be bombed more. It's a very important, actually, thing. We think that we reduce it down to a discussion between us, which is just very narcissistic. But people actually do care. That's why Russia today spends millions of dollars trying to manipulate the opinion of people in the United States, because it matters actually people.
And Al Jazeera.
And Al Jazeera, absolutely.
Zein?
Miriam, sorry about the left thing earlier. I was trying to be provocative more than clear. But the thing about it is that I think it would be clearer for me to say that the left, the positions, I've been an activist for 30 years and an anti-war activist for 30 years, and I've fought the first Gulf War, second Gulf War, and fought even the recent mobilization with against Syria and the intervention in Syria. And what I'm saying is that what I've seen there, just to salvage what the left has done, the left has done good work on that. And what I meant to say is that the approach to this has been inconsistent with the way they've acted in terms of these anti-war, these positions. And that these positions have been skewed by American propaganda. That's my criticism right now in terms of inconsistencies between solidarities.
Can I jump in real quick?
Really quick.
Yeah.
Well, just about, I mean, I agree with Loubna that it might be difficult to do a no-fly zone. I mean, I think that's a good point to make. But the rhetoric of a no-fly zone advanced by Hillary Clinton, and she's calling for massive U.S. military campaign in Syria. It's not a no-fly zone per se. What it's done is it's put rhetorical and political pressure on both the Syrian government and on the rebels in eastern Aleppo to carry out this zero-sum game around Aleppo. The Syrian government feels like it has till January or February to do what Bashar al-Assad disgustingly called cleanse East Aleppo. And you see what the rebels are doing today, which amounts to, according to Stefan de Mistura, war crimes. This is really a response to the campaign for a no-fly zone. So even the rhetoric and the campaigning for a no-fly zone, including by PR firms like the Syria campaign, has a dangerous effect on the ground.
Okay, so you talk about the other conflicts in the region. So this is an interesting point. So is Syria just about Syria? Or is it about the other conflicts in the region as well, like Yemen, Iraq, Israel, Palestine? Should the Syrian conflict's relationship with other regional countries impact how leftists approach the issue? And it seems to be that you think that it should.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think to continue along the same line of thought I was talking about earlier is the inconsistencies, is that not only should we be on the street, as Max just repeated many times, and opposing and even the rhetoric of a no-fly zone, because as Loubna said, it's not going to happen, but yes, the rhetoric of the no-fly zone is going to propagate more violence. But it has to be done, it has to be all-encompassing. It's not just against intervention in Syria, it's not just for de-escalation in Syria, but also in terms of the fact, the bloody work that the US is doing in Yemen. It has to be all-encompassing because it's all connected. It's a regional war that they're doing, and it's a continuation that you follow it from the end of the Iraq war. The people that were marginalized in the Iraq war and in the Afghanistan war went and came and fought in Libya, and then there's a domino effect there. And so what I'm saying is that the anti-war movement has to face all of these things and not ignore the fact that the U.S. is, like somebody mentioned in the crowd said, the U.S. is already on the ground. Yes, they're already intervening in Syria in a massive way. So we need to stop, deal with it collectively, and especially like right now. To give you an example, just to turn our heads a little bit towards, to get the big picture, towards towards Yemen. Yemen, as of 3 months ago, my Yemeni friends are saying, they used to say that this is a war waged by Saudi Arabia that's supported by the US. And 3 months ago, they changed their rhetoric because of the brutality of the attack and because of the nature of the attack. And they're saying it's the US strangling us with Saudi hands. And so that should be in the picture. It shouldn't be just against the intervention in Syria, and specifically, not just intervention, specifically de-escalation. The debate should be about escalation versus de-escalation.
Peter Maurer of the Red Cross said that Yemen in 5 months looks like Syria after 5 years. The United States is refueling those Saudi jets.
So is Syria about Syria? Is Syria about Yemen? And about other conflicts in the country?
Do you want to?
No, I wanted to comment on the no-fly zone and the Syria campaign thing. So.
Well, I'll make a brief point.
Yeah.
What's going on in Yemen is an utter disgrace, and every energy which can be used to stop the U.S. from enabling Saudi Arabian war crimes in Yemen should be expended for that purpose. It's an absolute disgusting situation that's going on right now. And Yemen is a situation where the United States is not playing merely a peripheral role in comparison to other countries. It's very much at the center of what's happening there. So by all means, it should be a forefront of advocacy. But should not be used, the suffering of Yemenis should not be used as a rhetorical device to mitigate or distract from the suffering of Syrians, which is very real and has happened in front of our eyes for 5 years.
So
Who's doing that?
We're at an event of Syria and the left, but now we've segued fully into a different country, which is fine, but...
Because many of the same countries are involved in fueling the violence in both countries.
I agree.
I think we need to have an international perspective.
Can we just step back a little bit and just realize that yes, Syrians stand in solidarity with Bahrain and Yemen and Palestinian people. And again, the white helmets, they tweeted in solidarity. So I don't think I need to justify myself, because you cannot really stand against injustice in one country and then stand with a dictator on the other country.
Who's standing with a dictator?
Some voices. In
stop it. Hold on, calm down. That's enough. Hey. We're going to stop this event if this happens. So please stop. Wait for the Q&A session. You can ask your questions then.
Well,
don't shout out as we're
when
trying
they
to
go
have a session
low,
here.
we go high. And after tonight, I think I'm going to need to get high.
Can we focus on Syria for a second and the voices of the Syrian people instead of just focusing on the Syrian situation through the American left, not the American left, the American lens, the American policy lens. I did not risk my life in demonstrations. I did not lose my like everything through this conflict to be at the end looked at it as I'm just like a puppet for the American government, because we're not. Because can we just for a second look at the Syrian conflict through Syrian eyes and stop just like it jumped?
Okay, hold on. I got it covered. Please stop. Go ahead, Loubna.
Okay, so for example, you're talking about the regime change and you're talking about the no-fly zone. Let me tell you something about the no-fly zone. The first chance for the no-fly zone was in late 2011. They are not new. Second of all, in the first days of the Syrian uprising, we did not ask for the regime change. We asked for justice, and we were in solidarity with the city called Daraa. So the regime change came after a while, came after like a week. It was, and also it came because of the escalating violence towards the protesters. And
Sorry.
Okay, and this scenario of that America was pushing the people for regime change was actually the government scenario when they accused the protesters that we were sent pills from Al Jazeera channel, that those pills you take them and you start like out of nowhere chanting against the Assad government and for the regime change. So please here let's stay away from both the government scenarios and looking at the Syrian situation from an American lens.
So I want to talk about this point about de-escalation, because you've mentioned that word specifically several times. I take you to mean when you say de-escalation as end the war. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So in a situation where the conflict is already escalating, escalating constantly, has escalated incrementally over the course of the last few years, and where there are already many actors involved, how do you achieve de-escalation? If that is your perspective, and beyond simply going out on the streets, what are the specific policy positions, other than saying de-escalate, that you think the U.S. left should be advocating for in order to achieve the de-escalation of a conflict where there are multiple actors involved escalating the situation?
I have influence over one factor. I don't pretend to have influence over any other factor. And that is the factor, we don't change history under, conditions of our own. Thank you. We change. I can influence my own government, which is presently is the United States of America, and which is contributing to escalation by the mere rhetoric and saber rattling that the Clinton administration is doing. And as was explained earlier, that kind of the talk of no-fly zone, when Hillary Clinton talks about a no-fly zone, when she knows, she's both admitted that it's going to result in, quote, the death of many Syrians, and also the Pentagon has admitted it will require about 70,000 boots on the ground, and of course the big one, a war with Russia, right? She knows that that's not going to happen. As much as she's a war hawk, she's not going to do it. But again, the kind of talk that is the rhetoric that's being put out is what's causing both parties to increase, to escalate the massacre of the Syrian people.
Yeah, I don't know how much influence the left is going to have on negotiations, but I think that intellectual energy can be put into how this can take place, and we have to acknowledge what's happening outside this room. Okay, first of all, we have to acknowledge in the Syrian military campaign, the Syrian government and its allies are currently winning with Russian assistance. So there is a discussion, there's a lot of ideas being put forward, for example, by the Saudi-funded Middle East Institute, by Charles Lister, for surging Syrian rebels with weapons. And if in 20 days the Syrian government refuses to engage in robust negotiations, I always wonder why negotiations are discussed like tomato sauce. After that 20 days, then the U.S. can then intervene. Doesn't sound like a very good idea. It sounds like an idea for more death to advance a U.S. geopolitical goal. And so that's what's kind of on offer. I think a great idea, and I mean, from what I hear from Murtaza, I think he's thinking similarly, is promoting local ceasefires. That can be done by incentivizing peace, by incentivizing people who have been involved in violence, including rebel commanders who do have credibility on the ground, to put down their weapons and start actually going into conferences with members of the government and talking about who can operate where and how to de-escalate. That's not what's happening at Geneva. At Geneva, you have people like Riyad Hijab, who is completely, I mean, he's not, from what I understand, very well liked within Syria. He's funded entirely by the Saudis. For the High Negotiations Committee. He's presented his plan at a British think tank, which is funded by the weapons industry for regime change. And he's holding conferences with the Syrian government, and they're going nowhere because he's demanding that Assad simply step aside. I think it's possible to start having some kind of interaction between people, including people fighting on the ground, in conferences that might be even secret conferences, to start building confidence and to start promoting local ceasefires that move towards a national ceasefire. But that requires also some pressure in the street. It requires pressure that we can put on for ending this war instead of continuing it.
Murtaza?
So, local ceasefires was a very promising path to ending the conflict, and it was put forward by many people in about 2013, 2014. These areas where the government had negotiated end to its control were able to become centers of civic life. The revolutionary spirit that imbued the original revolution was able to take place there again. The problem is that, as you correctly noted, the Assad government is winning now, and they had going through a huge PR campaign, which culminated in a New York Times article today by Bashar al-Assad himself. And because they're winning, they're rolling up those local ceasefire areas. We saw that in Daraya recently, which was a center of civil opposition to the Assad regime for many, many years under grave, grave conditions. And the end result of them winning is total sovereignty over the whole country. So I do agree there has to be a political compromise. It cannot be a zero-sum solution by either party or any of the parties currently involved in this conflict. However, the way it's going right now, one party is going to win. It's going to be Bashar al-Assad with Russian and foreign backers, who's going to take control of the entire country and impose a draconian system as though nothing had happened, as though 5 years of atrocities had never occurred. Refugees will never go home, and a vile crescent will have been sent. And as I said, maybe in 30, 25 years, Bashar al-Assad's son will take power in the country, as though none of this ever happened. That is a completely unacceptable outcome to this conflict, as unacceptable as if Al-Qaeda or ISIS took over the country.
Loubna?
I will probably just repeat the same points that he just said, but I just want to add a final note for the no-fly zone. I think, even though I was born and raised in the country and I witnessed 3 years of the conflict, and I came here as an asylum, as a student, and I'm here an asylum seeker. I still don't think I can talk on behalf of the Syrian people, and I think we should not be the ones who are discussing this, the no-fly zone. I think you should ask the families of the children that were just killed by an airstrike in Idlib on a school. And by the way, this is not the first airstrike on a school in Syria. However, I know that the no-fly zone is not going to happen. I don't know, I'm not going to say for a fact, but I just feel that the American government will not go into, again, a direct war with the Russians. So yes, I think I do agree with the ceasefire, and we saw lots of demonstrations during the ceasefires, which was broken by the government, by the airstrikes. So yes, let's push the Syrian government and let's push the Russians to stop the airstrikes and to help those people to move from their struggle for survival on daily basis to their struggle for democracy.
Okay, so I want us to move to a Q&A very, very soon. So one last question. The question is just for Murtaza. So my understanding is that when you were in Gaziantep, you spoke with some Syrians about the left, right, and their perspectives on it. Is that correct?
We were in Nizip, Gaziantep, many of the camps on the border, and people who are of that bent of mind, the traditional leftist bent of mind, remember that in leftism, or this ideology, whatever, I don't know how to describe it, as Zein said, but whatever we're here to discuss, there is an idea of internationalism. So they care what people here think, and they want to have their voices heard, and they have a message for us, which we should pay attention to.
And what's that message?
That we're not all terrorists. Everyone opposing the government is not a terrorist today, and we have a legitimate cause that if you let us go back to the dictatorship which has been terrorizing us for many decades, culminating in this horrific past 5 years, which is an unconscionable brutality in front of the eyes of the whole world, that will be an unjust end to this conflict. And if we oppose intervention, which I think is a reasonable position, we need to think of, okay, what is our vision for the future of Syria, which is just and stable and affords a sense of accountability for the past 5 years.
Okay, on that note, we are going to start the Q&A. Now, hold on, pay attention. So do not terrorize me or the panelists with your questions. Be respectful. Don't ask a question of these panelists that you wouldn't want asked of you in the sense of your tone and your presentation. Ask a question. Do not make a statement or ramble on and on and on. If you do, we will cut the mic. We have the power to do that. 30-second rule. We will cut you off if you do, in fact, ramble on and on and on and on. So don't do it. And finally, if you use foul language or attack the panelists personally or attack anyone else in this room, then we will shut down this Q&A, and it'll be your fault. And everyone will hate you. So those are the rules. Abide by the rules. We're going to take 3 questions at a time, then we'll answer, then we'll take another group of questions.
I have a question for Murtaza. You said that...
Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Phil Johnson.
Thanks for coming.
My question's for Murtaza, and you said that you would like to see a managed removal of Assad. Who's going to manage that?
Okay, thank you.
There should be a
Hold on, we're going to take 3, and then you can respond.
Okay, my question is for Max, involving the local ceasefires. Using the suburb of Damascus of Daria as an example, what possible hope can there be for local ceasefires, considering every man, woman, and child has to be removed from that suburb for the president to show his face there?
Okay, one more question.
Hey. Yeah, quick question. Just I would ask why do you think that America should stop, funding the Syrian people, like based on the, I would say, Iraq war, Afghanistan war, a lot of war that happened in the last decades, where America got were involved, wasn't that successful. So what do you think about, the American role in Syria, or should just stop, totally?
Okay, Murtaza, you want to answer the first question?
The question is about transition.
The question is about removal of Assad, who removes him.
There's still a potent political opposition within Syria. There's a reason that Bashar al-Assad needs an international intervention, an international coalition to come and rescue him and keep his government propped up. He can be compelled to negotiate with people. He should not be put in a position where he can destroy or he can eliminate all opposition in every center of the country which is not currently his control. Syria, unfortunately, today has been reduced to politically a satrapy of many regional powers. And he should not be put in a position where he will be handed an absolute victory over all opposition indefinitely. There should be conditions and stipulations attached to that which guarantee a democratic transition and guarantee some form of legal accountability for war crimes. So if anyone in the world is more dependent on outside support for their basic survival, it's Bashar al-Assad. We should recognize that and use that as a point to press on.
Max, do you want to answer the ceasefire question?
Yeah. I don't think there's anything wrong with calling for, with thinking about a different kind of track of negotiations than Geneva, which have been conferences in fancy hotels involving people, particularly on the opposition side, who don't have a lot of credibility within Syria. And so this is what we're talking about for first, maybe it's just an idea I'm throwing out there, for getting actual people on the ground who have credibility, including rebel commanders, to meet with the government, people with credibility in the government areas, and talk about how to make this happen. And I think the Geneva model has been sort of discredited, and it's also calling for Bashar al-Assad to step down when the military campaign that he's waging has been largely is at this point, it's got a lot of momentum. I mean, that's just an objective fact. So I don't know how that's going to happen. And I've heard different things about how there shouldn't be intervention, but at the same time, he should step aside. I don't think there's any way that it's possible without more escalation to put pressure on him. So I don't know what you're calling for and what kind of scenario will take place. I mean, what happens to the Syrian army? What happens? Is it just one dude steps down as a cosmetic move?
Well, if you want, we can articulate the entire. Well, this is a question for me now.
Well, I think the whole reason I'm participating in the debate, because we're almost getting into abstractions about geopolitics, is to talk about actual things that people can do in this room.
But people have questions, and they came here to ask their questions.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the displacement has to be stopped, and the only way is through these.
Why write about that?
Okay, all right. Okay, I think.
Well, how do you know I won't?
All
why
right.
are you telling me what to write about?
Okay, thank you. All right, we need to move on. Other people have questions. The last question was about the U.S. role. I think everyone does that in the conflict. Does anyone have anything to say about that? I think we're sort of clear on that. All right, and then the next round of questions.
Really quick. If we're going to talk about international intervention, and let's talk about it in the real world. The massive intervention has been mainly from Iran and Russia. Russia has now killed more people in Syria than ISIS, previous second biggest killer after the regime itself. And if we're going to talk about American intervention, let's talk about it.
Do you have a question? Do you have a question?
I want to respond to these points.
Oh, you can't respond. I need you to ask a question. Ask a question.
Fine, I can't. I don't have a question. I have just comments that they can respond to.
Okay, well then you can come talk to them afterwards.
I have a question both for Max and for Zein. Can I ask 2 questions?
Of course.
Sure. Short questions, please.
I want to say I have a statement here, U.S. hands off Syria, if anyone wants.
Okay. What are your 2 questions?
So the question to Max is if he would give a little more information on the role of the White Helmets and the Syria campaign as USAID funded public relations projects. And to Zein, I'd like to ask if he could comment a little bit more on the U.S. involvement in Syria, orchestrated through Turkey, through the NATO members, through Saudi Arabia, through Israel, all of which were bombing Syria for more than a year before Russian intervention. And also U.S. policy of sanctions on Syria, 1998, harsher in 2003, and extreme in 2011 as a way of carrying out regime change and dislocating the country.
Thank you so much. All right. Hold on.
Hi.
Oh, we won't, okay.
First of all, thank you to all of you for the panel. It's great to listen to all of you. My question is I think it's particularly for Max and Zein, when we're talking about marching in the streets and asking the U.S., demanding that the U.S. government end the war, we're kind of assuming that the U.S.'s strategy is set and defined in Syria. Isn't the problem that the U.S. hasn't really had a defined strategy in Syria? That the U.S. has been funding rebels to fight ISIS only when it comes to the DoD, and then the CIA wants to fight rebels who will fight Assad, and that the DoD tells the rebels they're not allowed to fight Assad and they won't back them, but they'll fight. But they have to fight ISIS.
All right, thank you. Thank you. That's all right. Okay, that's enough. Thank you, but I appreciate your question. All right, one more question.
Yeah, I got a question right here. So this question is for Loubna. So we've got around 20 to 25 doctors, less than 11 doctors are operating on the grounds of hospitals with very little space. So my question is, when you hear somebody like Max, in a sense, almost view any sort of Western funding inherently as imperialistic, what is, I'd just be interested to hear.
Did I say that?
Please let him ask his question. I don't need anyone else to moderate. I can handle it, but thank you. If you, what's your question? What's your question?
So my question is, Loubna, what is your take? I'd be interested to hear your take on when you hear an individual that states that Western funding is aligned with an imperialistic mentality.
Okay, so what might take? Well, do you have time to tell a personal story in 1 minute? Okay, so in 2013, I was based in an area in Aleppo called Bustan al-Qasr. So one day, a building actually 5 blocks away from us got hit by an airstrike. And back then, the civil defense, today are the white helmets, they didn't have the equipment to do their job as fast as possible. And we went there to take photos, and for the whole day you can hear the people choking with the dust because the white helmets or the civil defense people did not really have the good equipment to rescue those people. So now today I have to sit here in Brooklyn and arguing with you that no, I should tell those people not to take the hammers from the American government. My personal problem with all this debate that we are just focusing on the results instead of focusing on the reasons. Like, you cannot argue with a family that no, you should ask who paid for the ambulance before it rescues your child. Like, who does that?
The question.
Sorry, I got nervous.
Do you want to answer the question about white helmets?
Yeah, I mean, sure. And you know, Loubna's brought it up, and it's kind of a canard that anyone here has said that people shouldn't have any means to rescue children. If anyone actually read my articles, and I wonder, you know, if the 12 to 20 responses, which didn't challenge a single substantial fact, if the authors actually read it, the primary subject of the article, first of all, was the Syria campaign, which is funded by the, you know, woke petroleum billionaire Ayman Asfari, who is a member of the Syrian opposition, who's determined to promote regime change. The Syria campaign was is founded by non-Syrians. It grew out of a public relations firm called Purpose, which itself grew out of Avaz, which gathered 1 million signatures for a no-fly zone in Libya. We saw where that led. And the Syria campaign has waged an all-out attack on the United Nations, including Yaqub el-Hilo and his people who've done heroic things, particularly in old homes where they rescued people under fire from the Syrian government-aligned National Defense Forces. The Syria campaign is the most insidious public relations mechanism for promoting a no-fly zone and military action in the U.S. Now, I didn't interrupt you, and I want to talk. You know, Jean Baudrillard, in his 1991 essay about the Gulf War, which everyone should read on public perception, said that the media makes the war and the war makes the media. And that goes for the Syria campaign, which is attempting to cultivate public opinion in London and the United States in favor of a no-fly zone, in favor of military action, in favor of the kind of escalation that promotes more escalation from Russia. And I think it's totally fair game for me to scrutinize them and for me to scrutinize the leadership of the White Helmets when they come to the Atlantic Council in Washington, to the Rafiq Hariri Center, the Atlantic Council that's funded by Boeing, that's funded by the Saudis, that's funded by Lockheed Martin, and they call for a no-fly zone, sitting next to Frederick Hoff, Hillary Clinton's former handler for Syria, who's then calling for cruise missile strikes. I think it's totally fair for a journalist to expose the humanitarian intervention public relations strategy that we've seen again and again over history, leading generally, in most cases, to disaster. Now, if you don't, wait a minute. If you don't like my reporting, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of other pieces by other journalists who are spoon-fed PR by the Syria campaign, and all of these pieces about the White Helmets look alike. They're all, and you know, they're hailing them as heroes, and the people on the ground who are rescuing children, yes, they're heroic, but I am trying to fill the void about the public and inform you about the campaign that is insidiously cultivating military escalation. And I'm not going to be spoon-fed public relations by anyone. I would direct you to a piece by Murtaza for The Intercept about the White Helmets, which probably relied on heavy input and handling by the Syria campaign.
Let me respond to this point. So I think the crux of the discussion has been coming around these two articles which came out, the Syria campaign and the White Helmets articles, which has triggered this whole debate self-consciously about the left. Now, I'll say first of all that it's not in any way a secret or surprising that Syrian Americans have been asking for a no-fly zone for many years now, for 3-4 years since the barrel bomb attack started in opposition-held areas. There's nothing shadowy about it. It's been very out in the open. And we can disagree with it, but there is a very important moral issue at the end of it that those bombs are falling, and people very understandably do not want to see their families or their hometowns destroyed by airstrikes. Maybe the NFC is not the way to do it, but the fact that this is a secret is completely not the case. Secondly, if you want to argue against it, you cannot do an argument which is dripping with contempt for the idea that the White Helmets or others do not want bombs to fall on them anymore. The people who are pulling bodies out of ruined buildings every single day don't want the bombs to fall anymore. That's shocking. Who could have thought that that's the case? Of course they do. And furthermore, it's this very ugly sort of attempt to characterize them a certain way. When I was in southern Turkey, I've been there twice in the last year, with no PR person, no handler or anything like that, completely free freedom of movement, freedom of talking. Met many people from areas of rebel-held Syria where the White Helmets operate. And if you're going to do an article about them, you have to talk to those people and ask what they think about these people. You can't base it on YouTube or some clips which show this and that. No, I'm almost done.
No, I know. But Loubna has a moment too. Go ahead. Finish. Go ahead.
Well, there's a certain way of approaching the subject which does full justice to the subject. And I will come back to the example of Michael Brown in St. Louis. When he was shot, people did not like the way that was characterized. Some people didn't. They said that, he's being characterized as an unarmed guy who was shot by the police, but let's go into his Facebook and see this, and here's some decontextualized images of him here, or here's a YouTube video we found of him over there. So the thing is, there was no context to that reporting. No one understood the nature of the relationship between young black kids and the police in that neighborhood, or stores and young black kids in that neighborhood. So they pulled it out of context and assassinated his character. So if you're going to report it, you have to go there. The White Helmets are in Gaziantep.
You're comparing.
Hold on. Stop. Loubna's been waiting. Go ahead.
Okay, again, my whole problem with this argument that the Syrian voice has been eliminated. You are telling me about this guy, Al-Hariri, which I don't know, and the Syrian campaign. But did you ask the Syrians in Aleppo, in besieged Aleppo, if they want a no-fly zone, or what do they think about the White Helmets? Did you interview one of those parents that their children were rescued by the White
Eastern Aleppo? Because if I went to Western Aleppo
right now,
if I went with the delegation that's in Western Aleppo right now, I'd be attacked. If I went with the delegation that's in Western Aleppo right now, I'd be attacked as a regime supporter.
I didn't interrupt you. There are lots of injured people in the hospitals. It's okay. There are lots of people. There are lots of injured people in the hospitals in Turkey. You can go and interview them. I'm not asking you to go to Aleppo because probably you will be targeted by one of the government airstrikes.
do you have anything to say?
I don't think I'd be particularly welcomed by many forces there, but you know, I heard this parallel to Ferguson and Michael Brown, where a multi-million-dollar public relations campaign, mostly ginned up by non-Syrians for military intervention, is being compared to Ferguson.
White helmets are not.
I find that highly unusual. And you know, as far as talking to the White Helmets, the Syria campaign initially wanted to connect me with Raed Saleh, who spoke in favor of a no-fly zone at the Atlantic Council, but then they cut that off once I started asking critical questions. And once I started asking critical questions, I started receiving menacing emails. I started receiving threatening text messages before publication. After publication, I received a phoned-in threat from Idris Ahmad, who is supposed to be a journalism professor, threatening a journalist. I mean, there was a clear campaign to suppress the reporting of a massive public relations campaign for military action in Syria that would have led to more escalation, as Hillary Clinton correctly said in a private meeting, that a no-fly zone would mean a lot of dead Syrians. And that's something that we have leverage to stop here that I didn't want to see. And it's partly why I wrote that article. And journalists are supposed to ask hard questions and expose public relations campaigns. They're not supposed to be spoon-fed, Murtaza, by those public relations agencies.
I am not fed by anyone. I am not fed by anyone.
Okay, we don't need to accuse anybody.
Okay, because you just said that you are a journalist and you are doing the piece. Did you talk to any of, if that piece was on Syria and the white helmets and regime change, did you speak to any Syrians?
Loubna, I went out of my way when I had the opportunity, and you know, I haven't had the chance to be in Syria because in 2011.
You can Skype with them. I can.
There's a 5 million Syrian diaspora.
I went. Murtaza, you met refugees. I met refugees at the Zaatari camp. I went with my own money without a handler, and they told me about. And they told me, well, you know, I let you talk, and I apologize for interrupting.
Hold on. Enough from the peanut gallery.
Well, I think we should hear more questions from the crowd.
Okay.
I went to Zaatari. I heard I saw the destruction that these people had endured at the hands of the Syrian government and Assad. I have no illusions about it. I wrote about it in The Nation. I gave them a voice, and I also challenged at the same time the campaign for U.S. intervention that the Syrian Emergency Task Force was pushing, in coordination with pro-Israel groups and neoconservatives. So, I mean, my principles here have been consistent. I oppose military escalation and the kind of intervention in Syria that you supported wholeheartedly in Libya that led to disaster.
You know, thank God that Libya is not Syria today.
Okay. Well, hold on. So hold on. We have another question out there that has not been answered. The question was about U.S. strategy in Syria. Is there a strategy?
The question was.
The question was about whether or not there's a clear U.S. strategy in Syria. Is that correct?
The question is that you guys want the government to end the war as if they have a strategy.
Okay. Does the U.S. government have a strategy in Syria? Hold on, please, ma'am, please go ahead. Do you have a thought on that?
You know, in order to, I think I'll answer two questions with one, that question and that question. And that question about intervention and does the U.S. have a U.S. strategy? The U.S. is lost on Syria because its program didn't work out. So there's a confusion in how to approach Syria. But yet, they're still continuing with a rhetoric that's dangerous, that's causing escalation in the conflict. But the measure of intervention, because people are comparing intervention between the U.S. and Iran and Russia, in order to assess the intervention in the U.S. in Syria, you can't assess it just in Syria. You have to assess it historically. It has to begin with the invasion of Iraq and the displacement and the ripple effect that it caused in the whole region. And you have to assess it within the context of Turkey. And Turkey Turkey opening its border to all kinds of insurgents that went into Syria, and something that actually they regretted at this point, and something that sadly Murtaza actually supported. That kind of porous border to support what he thought was the revolution.
Yeah, hold
the
on. Let him
revolution.
finish. Let him finish. Let him finish. No.
And also, I'd like to say is like, why can't somebody expose the Syria campaign and recognize the humanity of the white helmets at the same time? You know, so you can recognize the humanity of the white helmets and the people that are doing on the what they're doing on the ground, but also you can also expose the Syria campaign and its insidious program, that the call for intervention, which is irresponsible, which is playing with the lives of the Syrians for its own political advancement. How many times have we seen that? How many times have we seen those kinds of things? You can criticize the UN while it's picking up cluster bombs in southern Lebanon on their hands and knees. You can say, thank you for picking up the cluster bombs from my fields, but screw you for imposing sanctions on Iraq that killed 500,000 children. So you can do both. That's what we're trying to get at. Let's get past that by recognizing the humanity of the people that are sincerely doing the work on the ground, sincerely using those hammers, but let's expose how they're being used behind closed doors.
Okay. We need to move on. These people have been waiting for so long. Murtaza, if you want to respond, you can respond because they called you out.
What was the point you made again?
That you supported
the border being open?
Yeah.
Do you know what would happen if you close the Syrian border with Turkey? You know the violence it would cause to millions of people who go back and forth for basic survival? It's a completely ignorant point to make.
Don't use that word. All right. All right. Another round of questions. I'm sorry, man. We need to move on. Please. You got your questions asked. Okay, go ahead.
I frankly, in a discussion about Syria, and in a group of leftists based in New York and not in Murtaza, I'm quite surprised to not hear any.
What's your question?
Of mass resettlement. So, what is the role of mass resettlement in addressing this conflict? Ideas coming from both sides of the table.
Okay. What is the role of mass resettlement? Is it for a specific person?
It's for
everyone. Okay, let's get two more questions.
My question for Loubna was something that you said about not looking at things through the United States, through an American lens. And my question is, if I'm willing to go along with everything you're saying and condemn Assad and condemn the Russian war crimes and say that everybody should be held accountable, still, the U.S. government is the government.
What's your question?
The U.S. government is the one that's accountable to me. How can I not take a U.S. lens when I'm the one who's in a country that many other people are saying should be intervening right now?
Okay, we can take two more questions and then that's it. So, sure, go ahead.
So the rebellion is largely Sunni, and the kind of rhetoric they have against the minorities is really scary.
What's your question?
For me as a minority, what does the role of minorities have if the rebels, who they are today, win and rule over Syria?
Sorry, what are the role of minorities? What will happen to the minorities? Is this for a specific person?
If the rebels, given who they are today, win in Syria.
Is this for a specific person? Okay.
Well,
no. All right. Sorry, Loubna. I'm sorry. One more question, and then we can answer. Yes. Good. Go. Oh, hello. Hi. Mariam, I have to hold you to the same rules. Come on, okay. All right.
I find it demoralizing that the only time the plan is brought up anymore is to make a point about the left and solidarity.
Okay.
Well, my question is, I have yet to hear a realistic plan of where do we go? Not the idealistic, let's all hug it out, or everyone lays down their arms. A realistic plan of how there's going to be an actual de-escalation of the war. I haven't heard any realistic outcomes, especially from Max and Zein. I mean, I know you all want to de-escalate the war, but how is that going to happen?
Okay, great. All right, let's start with the first question. What is the role of mass resettlement in this conflict? Does anybody have an answer to that? What is the role of mass resettlement?
I can answer. First, I want to apologize to Zein for saying your point's ignorant. That's not the case, and I appreciate the point you made. We actually just didn't go that badly, this panel.
Oh, good. Thank you. We'll watch the video later. Go.
What I'll say is that if we live in a world with open borders where people can resettle easily and there weren't nativist movements all over the world who were recoiling, which many people on this panel have done a very good job of highlighting in the past, this would be less of an issue. The fact is, though, that Syrians want to go home, and the societies they're going to are not very welcoming to them right now. So the path of least resistance for mass resettlement is within Syria and people's homes, where they want to return.
Okay. Loubna, there was a question about how you can. Okay, we want to start with minorities, but you have another question too. Okay.
What's your name again? Okay, Saad. My mom detained in 2012 by the government, although I am an Alawite. So my biggest fear today in Syria is the government that detains everyone that opposes them without really looking at their if they are Sunni or Alawite. For your question about the rebels, I still can argue with the fact that we have moderate rebels, we have still moderate Free Syrian Army commanders, that I was in their protection until May 2014, before I came to the country. I don't know if I answered your question, but...
Are they the major power players in Syria?
No, because they were fought by Al-Qaeda.
So the major power players in Syria, if they win, what is the place for minorities in Syria, given the rhetoric that's coming from them?
What do you mean? Sorry.
What? I can offer an example.
If I think that there will be a future, like a safe future for the minorities in Syria?
Yes.
Yeah, the rhetoric coming from the rebels is very against the groups that are minorities in Syria.
Right. Okay.
So
that's
where
really
is our
question.
place?
Okay. Max, do you have
I think that I will not argue that today the conflict is driven by anger and revenge. So that's why I said when I first started that we should hold all parties accountable for their crimes in order to have not only the minorities but also the secular opposition in the country again.
Does anyone else have a view on that?
Well, one of the rebels, and I doubt that you would agree he's a moderator, that's who you're talking about, that's been promoted aggressively as a moderate rebel is Zahran Aloush and Jaish al-Islam. I know he's not. I know you would agree with this.
He detained Zein back in 2013.
Yes, I know. And
so he is not a moderator.
I know you would agree that he's not.
Okay, let him answer the question.
I know that you would agree that he's not. But Eli Lake, the neoconservative columnist, is currently promoting the Jaish al-Islam's pro-Israel positions. The Atlantic Council has promoted Jaish al-Islam for possibly taking a turn towards Western values. That was in late August 2015. Here, former Ambassador Robert Ford, who was ambassador to Syria, someone who has a lot more power than everyone in this room and had it at the time, had promoted Aloush as a moderate rebel. Let's listen to the rhetoric of Aloush in 2014. The cheap calls of help by the Nusayri, which is a derogatory term for Alawites. And their intellectuals are useless after fear. Let's strike fear in the hearts of this filthy sect. The Islamic Front is moving forward until purifying the coast. Now, 3 days after Aloush was promoted for possibly taking a turn towards Western values by the Atlantic Council, Aloush and Jaish al-Islam in Ghouta, East Ghouta, which they controlled, put Alawite prisoners in cages and paraded them down the street to use as collateral against airstrikes. So we're not just talking here about punishing people who have Syrian blood on their hands. We all agree maybe that should happen in an international court of law, but we have to remove our complicity, and that means that when think tanks in Washington, especially those that are promoted by the same country that is helping fuel the violence in Yemen, in Bahrain, in Syria, are promoting people like Aloush, that we call them out, that we expose them, and that we make sure that arms stop flowing to figures like that.
Can I just say, I don't know why we keep quoting people from DC while you have a Syrian on the table. All right. I just told you, yes, Zahran Aloush was a criminal.
Okay.
And he detained
Because
Okay.
people from
We-
DC,
Okay.
because DC is where the sausage is.
We basically have no time left and 2 more questions. So no, there are no more questions to ask. 2 more questions to answer. No, Nima, stop. So we had a question from Mayim Khawaja. Where do we go from here? What is an actual practical de-escalation strategy? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my thought is that if we're going to get to de-escalation, if our dialogue is going to be about de-escalation, then that would be amazing if we get that out of the forum. The problem is that we're not here. That up to this minute, it hasn't been about de-escalation. All of it was either overtly or covertly about escalation, about bringing in more players, about the no-fly zone, and so on, and about pouring gas into the fire, basically. So I'm not here to draw out to chart out the course of the left in terms of this escalation, but if we can succeed to start talking about how we're going to de-escalate, how we're going to bring a political solution, how we're going to bring people to the table, how we're going to drop the rhetoric, the dangerous rhetoric that's happening, that's encouraging all sides to speed up the slaughter, then that's a good start.
I'm not expecting us to find a solution today for the Syrian conflict. I came here with the hope that you guys just show solidarity with the rebel held areas and the people that are being killed by barrel bombs. That's it. As much as you show solidarity with the people in the government side. And also admitting that the situation that we are reaching today in 2016 is because, yes, there was an uprising and it was repressed by the Syrian government. Again, it's not when we asked for a regime change, I don't know why it's supposed to be a bad word. When we asked for a regime change, we were not led by any campaign or by any American politician. I did not risk my life again in demonstrations because I wanted Jaish al-Islam to be in charge or because I was paid by Qatar or Saudi Arabia, because we had a voice and we still have a voice, and I'm sorry that you are not able to hear us.
Murtaza, let's see, do you want to weigh in on this question? That's the last question.
Well, I think I offered a lot of my ideas, the best ideas I could conjure up for concrete things we can do to remove our complicity for using leverage where we have it. And, it starts tonight. On November 5th, my friend Mitchell Cohen will be organizing a protest outside Hillary Clinton's campaign office in Brooklyn Heights right here. And I hope you all can join to not only protest in solidarity with people who are under Russian and Syrian bombing, also people who are in government areas who are facing rocket attacks, protest for de-escalation, protest against the U.S.-fueled war in Yemen. And I think this is a good start.
Can I just ask them a question?
Hold on. No, we can. Murtaza, do you have any last words on this point? No? Okay. All right. We can talk. You can talk afterwards. Thank you to all of you for coming. No blood was spilled. Some spit was spilled, but no blood was spilled. This was a success. Thank you to the panelists and to everybody else.
Very toxic, and I think we had this discussion, and I think that it's sad that people start hitting each other, and me and you and so many people
let me shake your hand so people don't think that we're gonna kill each other.
I don't know how to do it, but I just think between me and you, I don't want to attack you.
And look, I really respect the work so much. I like the fact that we're in this community, but I hope that we can.
So we agree on a lot of things, and we have to continue to work together. I like the disaster. circumstances. Yeah, we're glad that neither of us are taking anything personally, especially you know, for me, it was very graceful. Thank you for talking for this was pretty cool. It was nice to listen to. Yeah, Rand's here. To see the whole sides of it. Definitely. Yeah, just drop me a line. Yeah, I live here. Definitely. Okay, thank you.
Nice.